Okay, perfect. I will kick off. Welcome everyone to this IES webinar focused on the sustainability strategy and carbon reduction at Temple. Today we are joined by Iain Audus, Head of Sustainability and Safety, Health, Environment
Hi
and
everyone,
Quality.
if you're just joining,
and Emily's going to leave it a minute or so
whilst
within the Environmental Impact Assessment team, both at Temple. Today's webinar will use Temple as a case study and will explain Temple's approach to sustainability, including its B Corp status and how this informs and drives their net zero approach and carbon reduction plans.
For those of you who've just joined, I'll be getting started.
As always, there will be a chance for questions at the end of their presentation, so please do submit these in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. You can do this at any point during the presentation, and I will then ask these on your behalf later on. This webinar is also being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for logging in today, and I'll now hand over to our speakers, Iain and Emily. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us. So yes, as the perfect introduction said, we're here to talk about our sustainability strategy and our approach to carbon reduction. I'll probably interchange carbon reduction and net zero throughout the time that I'm speaking. Because we've had introductions, I won't introduce Emily yet, but Emily will talk mostly about the B Corp when we get to that section shortly. Okay, so what we're going to go through is a little bit of signposting what we're going to talk about, a little bit about us, not too much, but it's very important to get the context of us, so not so much a sales pitch, but more context about what we are and what we do, then leading into our strategy, the B Corp status, and then how that relates to and informs what we do in terms of net zero carbon reduction. And then I've picked up some of the takeaways that I think you might want, but again, you will probably pick up other things as we go through as well. This might just be, some ideas that resonate with you and some that you'll pick up elsewhere. Okay, so first of all, a little bit about us then. So we're a privately owned SME. We're a small business. We've got a national presence. We're not regional in any shape or form. So again, we have offices in London, Wakefield, Manchester, Lewes, and in Sussex, Norwich as well. And we've got offices all over the country. And people can work in any different locations. So, Emily, who's based in Manchester, might be working with colleagues in London and colleagues in Wakefield, etc. So we're not sort of regionally based. We offer a range of environmental and social sustainability services. So that's what we do. We're delivering sustainability services for our clients as consultants. So these include things like EIA, environmental impact assessment, ecology services, including all the sort of natural capital, ecosystem services, biodiversity net gain, all those things, noise and vibration, air quality monitoring, carbon accounting, carbon assessment, and carbon reduction strategies, social economics as well, which is fascinating, gets into social value side of things, and we do also sustainability advisory work. So that's a little bit about us. If you want to know more, templegroup.co.uk, you'll find out as much as you want to know about us. We're big on transparency, which we'll talk about as we go through as well today, so there'll be a lot on there if you want to look at it. Now, the thing is saying that the context of us and what it means to us is actually understanding what our business is. Now, we are a commercial enterprise, we're a commercial sustainability enterprise, but we're purpose driven, and our purpose is to make meaningful environmental and social difference together. That's what we go to work for, that's what we try to achieve every day in our business. So again, to pick out a little bit about that, the environmental and social difference, we're talking about making positive difference, either eliminating harm or to have positive impact. And it's the together part recognition of the fact that we are providing these services to others, to our clients, but also working with partner organizations and our supply chain as well to work together to do these. And that whole thing about working collaboratively as an organization to make this difference, not trying to just do it all on our own. So that's the sort of us and the context of us, and it's very important to transition now into what we're talking about on sustainability and our sustainability strategy. So when we look at this strategy and we think about this, it's sort of like, well, that's great, lovely words, fantastic, Iain, great words, love it, everyone's got great words, now what does that mean? Well, we've got to take that purpose and we had to think about, well, what does that mean? How do we enact that purpose? What do we do? And so the next natural part of that was to kind of say, well, if we're making meaningful environmental social difference together, well, we've got to be kind of eliminating harm, eliminating negative impacts, and trying to maximize positive impact. So that was the next thing that we looked at when we started to build our strategy. And we said, well, okay, how do we maximize that? And we've got this, we call a lens or basic principle of zero harm and net gain. We're saying where we're working, are we eliminating harm and zero harm, or are we having net gain? But then we've also got to apply that to where we have material impact. So the areas that we are already impacting on or have the potential to impact on. When we think about that again, being a purpose-driven business, taking into account good practice, all the recognised technology, recognised good practice and approaches to sustainability. We're then talking about, outside-in approach. So rather than just what we want to do, it's what does society need and what does the planet need in terms of sustainability and regenerative strategies, which is where we ended up with our strategy. Now, it was already going on the first slide. So this is what the front of our strategy looks like. So we've got this zero harm net gain in the middle, and then around the outside, we've got our 6 material impact areas, or just impact areas. So these are things where we are either able to have an impact or are currently having an impact. That's the principle of these. So it's taking stakeholder understanding and outside-in considerations and looking at that and saying these are our impact areas. And then for each of those impact areas, we say, well, actually, what are our objectives in terms of zero harm or net gain? And then it might be 1, there might be 2. So that's basically then is the front end, taking this overall purpose for our business and starting to add some strategic depth to it and saying, well, this is what we're going to do and what we're not going to do as well. Now, with each of these, there's another level of detail, and this comes back to the thing about us and our business and the importance of understanding our business and our service provision. So with each of these, we go a level below, which I'm not going to show you today. I'm happy to another time, but it would be too much detail for this session. We go level below and we talk about, well, what are the enablers? And it's an enablers model. So what are the things we do to achieve these objectives? And we'll talk about those when we talk about on climate change, but we have them for all of these different areas. And our enablers are split in 2 ways. They're split in the operations, how we run our business, but also into our services and how we run our services. So that's how our overall strategy fits together and how it works. Now, I touched on being purpose-driven, and I touched on looking at good practice and things. So when we were developing our strategy, we looked at all the recognised good practice things you'd look at. So for reporting and things like that, GRI 26000, ISO 26000, also looked at sort of methodologies for benchmarking. One of those methodologies we looked at for benchmarking was the B Corp impact assessment. Absolutely brilliant, free tool online that you can do to look at what your business is currently doing against sort of standard ESG metrics. So how are you currently performing? And when we looked at that, and the more we looked at it, the more we got to learn about B Corp and what it meant and what being a certified B Corp meant, and the more it resonated with us, and the more it resonated with what we're trying to achieve as a business and our purpose, and we decided to get certified. So I'll now hand over to Emily, and Emily will talk a bit more about B Corp, what that means, and what it means to us as a business as well.
Great. Thanks, Iain. So yeah, just as Iain said, back in September 21, Temple decided to take the exciting step to start the journey to becoming a certified B Corp. And we successfully obtained that certification in December 22. So quite a nice early Christmas present for us. But what is being a B Corp all about? So in order to achieve the certification, a company needs to demonstrate high standards of social and environmental performance. This is all underpinned by the B Impact Assessment, which essentially asks questions tailored to your organisation under 5 themes: governance, workers, community, environment, and customers. And as you go through the assessment, depending on how you answer the questions about your various environmental and social impacts for your operations and also your services, and the management of these under these themes, you're awarded points covering all aspects such as energy use, the emissions you produce, along with the employee benefits that you provide, the charitable giving, and how you engage with your suppliers and supply chains. B Corps must achieve a score of at least 80 points across these themes to achieve certification. And I won't lie, the verification is quite rigorous, involving documentation of your company's business model, and for me, chasing up various colleagues and departments for information about our operations, structure, and various work processes. So I'm sure my colleagues are very happy to hear about our certification, not least for not seeing my name in their inbox anymore, but we have got the recertification to look forward to, so I'm sure they're looking to that. But in all seriousness, not to overlook the strict standards that B Corp require, and that is that B Corps are also required to make a legal commitment to the movement by changing their corporate governance structure to be accountable to all stakeholders and not just shareholders. And I feel that this goes really hand in hand with the B Corp movement and what it's all about, and that being transparency and accountability. And so to hold the certification, B Corp publishes information on the B Corp website. We each have a dedicated page, so there's one for Temple, outlining how you performed for your B Impact assessment and a breakdown of your score by impact area. And the hard work really doesn't stop there. That's really just the first step in the process. As a B Corp, every year, Temple has to write an impact report. The B Corp Impact Report explains what the impacts we're making and the differences our company is making on people and the planet, detailing how we're tracking against various B Corp assessment criteria and how we're progressing towards our sustainability goals. And this all supports us in our journey to recertification, which we must do every 3 years to confirm our standards continue to be met, as well as using this as a framework to seek continuous improvement. As we continue to deliver against our sustainability strategy, the B Impact Assessment can really support us as we actively measure and enhance our impact areas where we most want to deliver change and value at Temple. So if you just go to the next slide, please, Iain. So that's all great, but how does that align to our sustainability strategy? What's the benefit that B Corp has in that sense? And I think what's really key is B Corp doesn't sit in isolation. It's embedded with everything that we've done as part of our strategy and what we continue to do so as part of our strategy. We know that vast sweeping changes can seem daunting, and it really is hard to know where to start. So where the B Impact Assessment really comes into its own is that it breaks things down to smaller, more manageable, people-focused behaviour changes collaboratively. Things start to make a lot more sense and feel a lot more achievable. And it's breaking things down against these impact areas, providing a really user-friendly tool and framework for the measurement and management of social environmental performance of our company. For example, embedded within the environment section of the B Impact Assessment includes several questions around resources focused on a company's carbon footprint, the environmental impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and best practices to meaningfully address, reduce, and offset those emissions. And in this sense, you can look to this framework as a tool for benchmarking and continual improvements, a key part of any sustainability strategy. Establishing where you are in terms of your impact and sustainability levels as a business, and really setting clear goals of where you want to be. Because the assessment probes every aspect of your company's impact, you are prompted to consider deficiencies you may not have considered before, and really getting to know where your material impacts are. And then, as part of our continual improvement, working towards recertification, we can ensure we're setting realistic targets. And as I said before, breaking these down into real bite-sized manageable steps to support the delivery of our sustainability strategy and make real inroads meaningfully over the next few years. As Iain mentioned, it was a choice for Temple to go down the B Corp path. There are, of course, other recognised sustainability frameworks, science-based targets, there's SDGs, the GRI reporting, for example. But what's so great about B Corp is that it doesn't operate in isolation of these. Instead, we can be rest assured that these best practice approaches are embedded within the assessment and the movement. B Lab are partnered with the Science Based Targets Initiative and provide a number of resources and tools of how frameworks such as the SDGs and GRI standards can align to the B Corp journey. All whilst recognising that while fulfilling slightly different purposes, all that these help organisations increase their awareness and transparency on their impacts. Bringing these insights together can really unlock a more holistic approach on how these impacts are disclosed and managed. And finally, from me, collaboration and making ripples for change. It really is a community of purpose-driven businesses. The B Corp certification provides instant access to a community of other organisations looking to use business as a force for good. Businesses and organisations to see each other not as competitors, but collaborators. And personally for me, this has been one of the best things about being a B Corp. We have instant access to a whole host of brilliant people, working groups, knowledge networks, and workshops, all working our way towards the same goal. And as Iain will get onto in just a second, our sustainability journey has required trying new things, seeing if they work, learning from that, and trying again. It's okay to know things and make mistakes, and being part of the B Corp community can really help with that, guiding us as we fulfill our strategy aims and improving our work. And with that, I will hand back to Iain, who's going to tell you a bit more about our journey. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Brilliant. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and I probably should have touched on this before, so apologies. But all of this is a light touch. There's so much detail. The B Corp assessment and the B Corp movement is fascinating, and I do recommend go and have a look. They've got lots of material, lots of just open source material that tells you all about it and what they're trying to achieve. So go and have a look, see if it's something you're interested in. And again, you can do things like the B Impact Assessment. You can do the SDG analysis without having to actually sign up to be a B Corp. They're just there for you to utilise, which is a brilliant part of that collaboration that Emily touched on. Okay, so getting me back on track then, as I segued off onto a slightly different topic there. So getting me back on track, we've talked about a little bit about us, the context of us, our business, and how our sustainability strategy was created, and what that means in terms of the B Corp connection as well. So then coming into this sort of like, the net zero agenda and, what we talk about with that. And the first thing I wanted to mention here is whenever we talk about carbon reduction or net zero, any of those things, we've got to remember the aim is to eliminate CO2 and equivalent emissions. I've worked for 25 years on, and been around this whole principle and the whole carbon accounting the whole time. And it's amazing how much of an industry there is around it. And I'm not being critical of that, but just this point that we have to keep coming back all the time to eliminating emissions. There's, we've done all the research. We know all the technical information. We know everything. What we need to do is eliminate emissions. And I think sometimes people can get too embodied into the strategy, too embodied into the technical thinking, and forget that that's what we're fundamentally about. So that's my little plea on that one. The other thing that I'm going to say now is, again, I'm a generalist. I'm not a technical expert in these things. One of my colleagues, Charlotte, on the call, who is a genuine technical expert about carbon accounting and things like that, and talk to those people if you want. I'm a generalist, but when I'm talking about all of this stuff now about net zero and carbon reduction, all these things, it's implied and it's understood that everything we're talking about comes back to good practice. We are aligned with the Science-Based Target Initiative. We don't sign up to it. We're a small company, but we're aligned to it. We're approaching that. We take their net zero definition, which is 90% reduction on your baseline, minimum 90% reduction on your baseline. We again aligned to ISO 14064 and the greenhouse gas protocol and things like that. So all of that stuff I'm talking about now, I'm not going to go into all of that level of detail. That's the stuff we do and that we have done in the background of our approach to carbon reduction. Okay, so coming back then to our strategy and how that relates to net zero, and what this is then is it's coming into this thing of this zero harm and net gain. Now, some of the stuff we're doing is net gain, and that's slightly different. But fundamentally, we're talking about carbon reduction is the zero harm part. We're talking about being a zero carbon emissions business, and that's what we talk about. We talk about a net zero strategy and a net zero approach for a business. We're talking about the corporate body reducing its emissions. So we're talking about that zero harm part. So then our strategy says, well, how do we do that? Well, we've got a series of enablers. Now, these are the things that we're going to do to try to achieve this objective. So these are operational enablers. These are the ways we run our business. Now, at the top of that, the hierarchical approach to that is the zero carbon policy. That sets out our broad direction of travel, statement of intent and commitments. That's the bit that says what we're going to do. That's aligned with the Pledge to Net Zero, which is an external movement that was set up for the environment industry specifically to say, as environmental professionals, we're all going to join and pledge this net zero, and that has some particular targets and expectations as well. So it's an external thing, but we've aligned to it and we've signed up to that. I think we signed up to that about 4 years ago now. So again, it's a good thing about external scrutiny and understanding. So those two things align together, but this is ours. This is what we're going to do. Now, we use that to develop carbon reduction plans. Now, again, that's what we're going to do this year against the footprint and to try to drive our performance against these policy commitments. And then we've also got other policies that help us as well, help us to do that. So we've got sustainable travel policy, and we'll touch on this one in a second, and we've got sustainable procurement. So these are other things that are driving the rules or the behaviours in the business related to trying to achieve our zero carbon policy objectives and ultimately our overall objective of having zero emissions. Now, we've also got, and I touched on this before, and I'm not going to go into this in massive detail, but we will touch back on it again later. As a business that is a purpose-driven business and providing consultancy services, we have both operational enablers and service enablers. So we're only going to talk about operational for the most part. We'll come back to this, but it's a really important thing to recognise with a business like ours that our sustainability strategy applies to all of the services we deliver as well. So when we talk about eliminating emissions here, and we're talking about net gain here, we're also talking about doing that together for other clients, which comes back to our purpose we were talking about before. Now, we'll touch back on that, but just that recognition that this is what's right for our business and the context of our business, but wouldn't necessarily be the case for everybody else on this call. Got to make it right for you. Okay, so not done all of our policy commitments, but if I'm just pulling that thread through all of those lines from the strategy through the policy. So we take our zero carbon policy operational commitment. So we've got some big commitments we've made here. So we said we're going to be net zero business by 2030. ahead of the 2050 pledge we've got on the pledge to net zero, and also that's ahead of the government's 2050. So we're trying to do it by 2030. That's because we believe that's what we should be doing, and we believe that, again, as environmental sustainability consultancy, we should be doing as much as we can as quickly as we can. And also, it's a climate emergency. It's not a climate thing that might be bad in the future. It's an emergency. We have to act with the urgency related to that. And so that's why we've got the 2030 target. We've talked about the type of emissions we've got. We're talking to be carbon neutral, and we'll touch on carbon neutral again in a second. We'll also talk about exceeding carbon neutrality, and we've got this average reduction, so absolute reduction on our emissions to 2.5% per year as an average. So you could do 10 one year, 5 the next. And then also talking about thought leadership and leadership overall in the sector. That comes back to the pledge to zero. So that's some of our commitments that are in our policy. We take those things and we put them into our carbon reduction plan, but we put them into our carbon reduction plan based on our carbon footprint. So the accounting of what our current carbon footprint is, and then we create a carbon reduction plan to work against that. So this graph then is it sits in our carbon reduction plan, but it also relates to our carbon footprint. So we've got our baseline year up here, and we restretched the business. We've been doing carbon footprinting for about 15 years, but we restretched the business. We had a new baseline because of change in the business. So baseline up here about 536 tons per year, and then we have the government and the pledge to net zero target to go for 2050. This is a line you have to be on to achieve that 90% reduction by 2050. Now, Emily touched on this before. Our original 2.5%, and I'm quite happy to admit this, I just chucked a number out there. I chucked a number out. I said, let's stick something down, we'll see what happens. And we put 2.5% as target. If we'd continued on that 2% path, 2.5%, we'd not hit the reduction needed by 2050, not even that once. We're never going to get the 2030, which we talked about. So then we recalibrated and we said, okay, we need to do this pathway to get down to here, to get down to about 50 tons per year as a reduction. And then when the current trend model we've got here is based on the 2022 carbon footprint. We've had a massive reduction between 2021 to 2022, massive reduction to a number of things, primarily about changes to our office energy supplies, our vehicles, and also changes in methodology due to the whole COVID impact and things like that. The methodologies weren't great at the time, they're greatly improved now. So we actually, but the majority, like I say, has come out of those three things. So we've got this current pathway, and then we can plot this trajectory down to where we need to be. So that's what our carbon reduction plan is trying to do, is to say, well, okay, what are we going to do this year that's keeping us on that line? So when we look at that, we get some hotspot areas. You pick off the things that are, either have the biggest bang for buck or the highest significance. So our hotspot areas are combined for about 80% of our overall footprint of these: home working, gas, electricity, business travel, and commuting. Now I'm just going to pick on business travel. I haven't got time to go through everything today on these, so we'll just look at business travel as a follow through for the next stage of this. So the other thing to recognise on here then, as I said, our original target in our policy is 2.5%, and actually what this is telling us is we need to do 18%, so 25 tonnes per year. And what's going to happen is these first few years are going to be achievable, but it's going to get increasingly difficult, and we need to take that into account as well when we look down the road at where we're going to be. So when we take that then, the business travel, we've got a sustainable travel policy, and there's a lot of detail in there, and there's processes and things, and there's structure behind this in our management systems that helps us. But fundamentally, it's about enacting this hierarchy. And the reason I wanted to touch on this one rather than some of the others is this is largely driven by behavioural activities, and that's what carbon reduction requires, and more broadly, what sustainability requires, and particularly regenerative sustainability. We'll talk about that. It requires us thinking differently. You'll have probably come across people talking about system change and things like that as well. But it's genuine. It's an individual behaviour which becomes an organisational behaviour which enacts system change. So this is an example of of behaviours that people need to do. The traditional thing, the client saying, "Come here, I want to talk to you in the office," is to travel. We're going to do that travel. Well, actually, do we have to? Do we have to or not? And forgive me one little anecdote from my past. I spent 15 years trying to do video technology with people and getting told it doesn't work and we can't do business that way. and then you have a global pandemic, and sure enough, everybody can do video technology. So it's really interesting that it wasn't about the technology working, it was about the behaviour wasn't there, the will wasn't there to actually work in that way. And we need to be very careful to understand that, you know, this is what we need for the carbon reduction, is behavioural change, is doing things differently all the time. So, you know, so we adopt this hierarchy to every bit of business travel we have. You know, don't travel, zero impact, walk or cycle. Now we get our sustainability hats on and we go, well, actually, if we're walking or cycling, that's good for our well-being. So that's a positive thing to do as well as being a positive thing in terms of emissions. Then we get into public transport, zero emissions vehicle, low emissions vehicle, standard petrol, diesel, and air travel, which we try to avoid at absolutely every opportunity. We had like one flight in the last 5 years that I'm aware of. Now, with that, like I say, it's primarily driven by our employees. They have to use that, apply that logic in their behaviours, how they work. But we can also support them in the business. So we can ensure that when, you know, we encourage people to use the hire vehicles, or when we lease vehicles, we're leasing zero emission vehicles. So we again changed our fleet out. The ones that were coming towards the end of their life, where it's an environmentally responsible thing to do, was to change them. We've gone for zero emission vehicles, but also hiring them. And again, when we started this, it was quite difficult to hire zero emissions vehicles, and there's more of them now, so we can readily provide those to our employees to use. Likewise, again, we can hire the low emissions vehicles, and then some of the standard petrol vehicles are going to be the stuff that is our existing fleet. We've got, I think, we've got two old ecology Toyota Hiluxes that we use, which are diesel and 4x4s that we, you know, and we'll trade them out at their end of life. But then we also get this thing of personal usage, and so people can, you know, will drive their own cars to go to particular business travel. Now we try to discourage that, and we try to discourage that because don't travel at all. But then if you do have to travel, we want to use the lease vehicles or the hired vehicles, which are low emissions, rather than using the personal vehicle that's emitting CO2 emissions, etc., and also the local air pollution issues as well. So that's how it works. You know, trying to discourage these ways and providing the solutions for people. So that's an example of just what we're doing, working on business travel. Like I say, we've implemented policies to have, you know, lease and hire vehicles being zero emissions as a default, having those conversations with the providers, finding the right providers to be able to do it, putting those into policies, rolling those out with the company, etc. So we do those things. We've changed our leases. We've leased 4 new zero emission vehicles this year. So then once we've done those, we've enacted those changes, we don't need to monitor it all the time, and we need to monitor consistently. So we'll be collecting our data throughout the year, and every quarter we're looking at it and we're saying, are we online? Is it making the reductions you're expecting or not? If it's not, what else can we do? What can we do to change that, rather than waiting till the end of the year and then going, oh, we didn't hit our targets. So it's a continuous monitoring and review. So then what happens is, so that was, you know, an example of which go to business travel. So I'm going to come back to our overall footprint now and saying, well, you know, what are we doing about this? Well, we've got 260 tons. That's our current, that's our 2022 carbon footprint. So 260 tons, and we'll call that our residual emissions. That's stuff that we still emitted, even though we've taken action. And we'll have that next year and next year and next year, and we'll have that until 2030 as well. There'll still be residual emissions. So then we get this issue of carbon neutrality, and there's a lot of this in the media at the moment about companies stepping away from being carbon neutral, or talking about being carbon neutral and offsetting, essentially, you know, offsetting your carbon emissions to another place and trading the credits. So there's a lot of discussion about it, and I think yes, you should offset. Basically, the upshot and answer to that is yes, you should offset, but you should do it always ensure that you are actually eliminating emissions wherever possible first. You're not offsetting instead of. You should never be this is that behavioural change thing and system change. You should never be just going, oh, we generate this much carbon, so we'll just offset it. It's got to be, we've done everything we can to eliminate emissions, and what we've got left, we're going to offset because of value to that. But also, when you're offsetting, what other impact can you provide? So coming back out of a carbon issue into a sustainability issue and saying, what other impact can you have? Where else can you have value? And so when we set our offset criteria up, we said it needs to be a recognised, verified scheme, because we're going to be transparent about this, and it needs to stand up to scrutiny for our stakeholders, and we need to be exemplar. So, you know, recognised, verified scheme, international trading scheme. But we also want it to be local and UK based, because we recognise some of the challenges that we face in this country, and a lot of these things, again, there's a lot of issues with sort of, you know, both the generation of emissions are in other countries, but also we're forcing the solutions on other countries as well. So we wanted to make sure we do things in the UK. We also want a biodiversity net gain because of the other broader impact and benefits they have. Biodiversity is in so much trouble, but it's also has to be part of the solution to dealing with climate change, which is happening. It will be the resilience to climate change. It will help to mitigate it, and the more diverse natural environment we have, the more chance it's got of actually being able to adapt to the rapidly changing environment. If we, take on all levels of biodiversity, so it's absolutely critical that we can have net gain as well there. We also want public access. One thing again came out of COVID. We all probably know this in the industries we work in. Nature's great. Getting people access to nature gives them a connection, makes them care for it more, makes them be more stewards for the natural environment that they're in. So we want to get public access to nature, and we want to support renewable energy to push the renewable energy mix up and reduce the fossil fuel mix. So not much criteria. And so lo and behold, what we found was we couldn't do that. We couldn't do that in one scheme. So what we've ended up doing for the last 2 years is we offset our full footprint to achieve carbon neutrality status through recognised schemes. So this is the recognised carbon credit trading schemes, and this one's aligned to the United Nations Clean Development Mechanism. So we offset it into a wind farm, so that's improving the use of renewable energy, eliminating fossil fuels, and that level of support that we're getting for that offsetting. And then we also take the same carbon footprint and we use that, transfer that into credits to then do the other side of it. So we're actually offsetting twice. And they were doing that for an afforestation scheme in the Scottish Highlands near Loch Ness. Now, these wouldn't count as the verified scheme credits because they're called pending credits, because it takes time for the trees to grow, to absorb the carbon and store the carbon, etc., etc. So you can't claim an immediacy of those credits. So this will be something that will happen over time. But what it's going to do is it's going to create improved habitat, and the forest cover in Scotland is about 3% of what it used to be. So again, coming back to the challenges of dealing with climate change and mitigating climate change and providing a healthy world for us to live in, we want to reforest and full holistic reforestation, not just kind of singular pine trees, whatever. It's about getting a healthy ecosystem. So that's what we do there. So it's essentially, you could call that like double offsetting or double neutrality or carbon positive or various terms like that. We don't really use those terms. We just explain what we do. So when we've done that, then we then get into our system again of we do these schemes. We've done our reduction of our carbon footprint through our approach to business travel, and we've got this equivalence on home working and on commuting, etc., etc. So then you come back into this consistent monitoring and looking at it and saying, are you online? So that's what we're doing now, and we'll be going through for the rest of the year up until the calendar year. So we're collecting, analysing the data. Are we on target? We currently are, but we've still got a few months of the year to go. We're going to achieve that 80% reduction. But also you start to think about what else you need to do. What do we need to improve? So again, I mentioned before about this big change here. When we did our baseline, the knowledge of and the methodologies for reporting on home working were pretty poor, to the extent we couldn't refine too much. So we created some methodologies ourselves. And then over time, with everybody working at home in the COVID pandemic, the methodologies, recognised good practice got launched and issued. When we applied that recognised good practice, we realised the faults in our system and we updated the methodology. So it's an example of where you're learning all the time and improving. So we update our methodology, but it could also be other things as well, other scope 3 parts. Have we looked at, we haven't currently looked at our banking or our pension and what impacts they have. We haven't looked at, the commuter data for a while. We commuter data collection would be quite intensive. So we might, again, look at, what techniques are out there to collect the commuter data to improve the information related to that. So you look at your methodologies, and then you create a new carbon reduction plan. So you come back in and you say, well, okay, we're now down here. What are we going to do next? What's the next thing we can do to try to reduce this? So, wanted to touch back on this. I mentioned before about the sort of like the corporate net zero approach. So how we're reducing the emissions from our operations into the sustainability strategy. And this point about zero harm and net gain, where we're looking at other things and we're looking at broader things. So the other part of the zero harm, again, from our services, if we all of these services that we offer to clients, now this isn't our carbon footprint, not admittedly, but we're supporting clients. We're working together to help them to manage their impact. And approximately in the same period that we had 260 tonnes in our company, we accounted for about 900,000 tonnes reduction. So we're getting a much bigger impact by working with our clients than we are operationally. Now, there's a lot you can critique and question about that. But I just wanted to put that in the context of a purpose-driven business and sustainability strategy about how important our services are to us, and how significant those impacts are that we're making as a business and want to make as a business. The other thing that I haven't put the data on about this, but the other thing again is we're talking about net gain here in carbon capture and things, the same what net gain are we having in terms of biodiversity net gain. So all the projects we do for biodiversity net gain, all the ecological enhancement work we do as a business is all helping here in the climate change adaptation and resilience. It's all helping to achieve that goal as well. It's not the primary driver, it's a secondary achievement. And that's that thinking about sustainability as being not singular issues. All these things are interrelated, and that's where your sustainability strategy really helps to pull those things together. Okay, so talk through the net zero approach, and just give me a quick example again. Couldn't go through everything, but just one to highlight one way that you pull it all the way through from your strategy into your net zero target and your reduction plans. So then some of the takeaways that I've got, and again, you'll pick up your own. So some of the takeaways I've got from thinking about this and reflecting on it, well, sustainability is not a one issue. It's not a one item issue. Climate change is interrelated to everything else. You know, it is an emergency. It's really important to do it, but you need to recognize in your sustainability strategy the connections with other areas. Be humble when you're doing this stuff. Be humble about it and your abilities. Be humble about your knowledge. You know, don't try to do everything at once. Don't try to exclude other people. Emily talked a lot about B Corp. You know, B Corp's fantastic. You know, once you get into that network and people just like, does anyone know anything about this? Does anybody know about community engagement? Does anybody know anything about double materiality? And people jump in to help you, and they support you, and there's working groups that support you. And again, and that's true across the whole sector. Somebody in our business, well, CEO in our business actually said, sustainability is not a race. You don't win sustainability. You know, there's no point in you finishing the race first if everybody else finishes last. And that's that thing again about collaboration. So, be humble, acknowledge what you know, what you don't know. Be honest and open about it, and seek help. Be transparent. Always be transparent about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Let other people draw their conclusions from your transparency, but be honest and transparent about what you're doing. With strategies, with any of these things, be you in your business. Don't try to overlay what somebody else has done. Understand the good practice, apply the good practice, apply the bits that don't work to you. Don't reinvent the wheel, that's all fine, but fundamentally be yourself. This strategy, this approach works for Temple. It might not work for anybody else. You've got to do that. Otherwise, it won't resonate. You won't get the behavioral change in the business. You won't get the system change from people if it doesn't reflect what you are. Now, slightly counterintuitively, having said all of that, and also been talking about don't overthink stuff. Sometimes you just got to chuck some stuff down, write it down, crack on, see what happens. I know it's counterintuitive, but that's the danger, particularly when we're talking about carbon and things like that, is there's a lot of technical analysis, and we need more reducing emissions. Okay, and then on the carbon specifically, then segueing into that, remembering this thing, it's always about eliminating emissions. Keep bringing the focus back to that. You do a pathway like we have and say this is as being responsible and doing a pathway, but you need to accelerate that pathway and go, this is what we can do, but let's go even faster, but keep on that emissions all the time. Do align again with the good practice, greenhouse gas protocol, loads of all the good information is already there. SBTI, that should be a capital I. The SBTI, it has all this information. You don't have to necessarily sign up and be validated by this Science-Based Targets initiative, but you can align to it and align to that good practice. All that stuff's already there for you, so it fills some of your knowledge gaps and your holes that exist elsewhere. Neutrality is okay, but it has to be a part of what you're doing. Your aim has to be eliminating emissions, and then what you're left with, try and do some good. And if you're going to do some good with the neutrality, let's think about other sustainability things. Think about other things that you can add value with in other impact areas. Fundamentally, got to ensure your leadership understand and commit to all this. A lot of net zero strategies and things were driven by executives saying we're going to do this, we're going to do it, and I think now people are starting to realise what it entails and what it costs, which is why you're seeing some pullback from some of these schemes and some of these approaches now. So getting leadership engagement early and understanding that this system's change, they've got to recognise and understand the system change. It will have financial investment, but sometimes it's not about the financial investment. It's about a recalibration of where that investment's going. We're going to spend the money up here, and it's going to save us money over the long period, or we're going to spend this money here that we were going to spend on something else. Because if we're not going to have a training budget in 10 years' time, because there won't be a business in 10 years' time if we don't deal with with eliminating carbon emissions. So it's kind of like having those conversations with them realistically and make sure and understand fully what you're doing and what they're signing up for. Okay, so fundamentally then, I've touched on this quite a bit, it's all behavioural. It's all behavioural. It's all about how we change our behaviours individually within our business systems and our business environments, and then how that will create system change within the business sector as a whole, and changing the whole concept and the approach to carbon emissions or sustainability. And it's all about system change and about changing the way we do things. If we carry on with the status quo, we're going to be in real serious problems. We have to change, and that comes with behaviours. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening to me and Emily. I hope you found something useful from it. And I believe, Ethny is questions now, maybe.
Yes, thank you so much, Iain and Emily. That was so interesting and useful to hear about Temple's journey and how you kind of start with a sustainability strategy and go down into those different impact areas with a focus on climate change, and also how the B Corp certification links in with all of that. So thank you so much. To all of our attendees, please do put your questions for Iain and Emily into the Q&A function. To kick us off, I just wanted to kind of lead on from the last point you just made in your takeaway, which is around this need for behavioural change, especially when it comes to things related to carbon reduction. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how you've been supporting behaviour change amongst the staff at Temple and some of the things you've enacted in that space.
Emily, do you want to say anything, or do you want me to?
I'll let you go first. It's your slide, and I can always pick up anything that I have observations on.
Yeah. Okay, so some of it's about awareness. We're lucky in some regard. It's an interesting one, actually, and I have to be careful I don't waffle on too much. We've got a lucky situation in that we are environmental sustainability professionals, and so people are already on board. You're not having to convince them of things. You're not having to convince them of the need to protect the environment or whatever it may be. But conversely with that, what I find quite interesting is everyone's at a certain level, and you don't get that advocacy that you might get in another business. When I was consulting, you used to get a lot of very passionate people who would run around advocating for this change. And we're on the levels. Everyone's like, well, of course, we all know that, whatever. So we don't focus much time on that. We don't focus much time on trying to win hearts and minds. It's more about how do we listen to people and what the challenges they face in their work, and how do we help them to enact that behavioural change. So if we take the business travel one again, it might be simply raising the awareness of it with them, but then talking to like junior staff about, you can say no to your client. These are the type of things you can say to your clients to advocate for not traveling. Your clients come to a purpose-driven sustainability consultancy. They will want to hear this. They will want to hear you coming back to them. So don't just go along with what they are. So it's that kind of helping to people to do that, and then some of the stuff again in more practical terms of changing our procurement policies and our hire agreements and things like that to enable people so they don't have to fight the system. The system's working with them. Does that help?
Definitely. Thank you. Did you want to add anything to that, Emily? Were you happy?
No, I think just to support that, we really empower people to, as Iain said, have that confidence to really, second challenge people, if you know what I mean. And, is this really the right thing to do? Do I feel, that I could do this better? And I do have the confidence and the empowerment to challenge that. And yeah, I think that comes through in everything we do, really, both operationally and in our services as well.
Great, thank you both. And a question here from an attendee. So you briefly touched on kind of how your sustainability strategy interacts with your supply chain and partnerships. The question here is, how do you ensure that carbon elimination is also practiced by your contractors and subcontractors? And how accurately do you measure their indirect carbon emissions, or do you rely on the reporting provided to you from them?
Good question. There's probably about 3 questions in there, isn't there? So I'll tell me if I don't get them all. On a very basic level, with a business like ours, our supply chain in terms of subcontractors for our services tend to be micro businesses, even sole traders. And so it's very small. So what tends to happen, if we think about them first and foremost, is they essentially are the same as working for us. So they come in and we capture their data for them and we report their data in that sense. So those type of businesses, whenever somebody's working with us like that, they come in that way. If they're larger, and if it's a larger scheme, and Emily's more knowledgeable about this than me, but in the practice, but if you're doing a larger EIA, for instance, and you may have a partner organisation that's covering 3 or 4 technical disciplines, and they are a bigger entity, they are a bigger entity than us. Often they're often 4 or 5 times the size of us. They will already have the reporting in place, and we will look at their reporting, give some due diligence to it, assess the standards they've applied, and essentially, if it's all fine, we'll just take it at face value. We're not going to critique what they do as long as they're applying the same good practice tools and techniques to their footprints. And again, lots of those organisations are already getting it externally validated as well, so it's quite comfortable. So there's a range depending on who it is. Where we're not there yet, that we're trying to work on at the moment is into the other suppliers, the suppliers of non-service related, so the operational suppliers. So how confident are we with our the data that comes back from Microsoft on our cloud system? Not confident at all. So we are on the side of caution and we report a worst case scenario, because their reporting on the cloud-based infrastructure is vague, to put it mildly. So we just say, let's assume the worst. Let's assume it's all from coal-fired power stations. So hopefully did I answer all the elements there?
Yeah, that's really useful. Thank you very much, Iain. And then just final question, just because we're running out of time. But the other thing you mentioned was this kind of shift when you're thinking about getting B Corp certification, is the shift of moving from thinking about kind of shareholder value to thinking about value and impact on wider stakeholders as well. How did you go about kind of getting buy-in from the leadership of Temple to make this shift and kind of go after B Corp certification?
We duped them, I think. No, we did. We did. I think this is the bit about it aligning with us and about picking things that you align to naturally. So because we'd already decided as a business that we wanted to be a purpose-driven business, and that was the purpose we were going to, it was then what B Corp was a natural fit. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't something we had to articulate or sell to them, or even, like I say, duping them. We didn't have to hide anything from them. We were like, this scheme is going to add value to what we're already doing, and we believe we can add value to this scheme as well. And the overall point of the movement is to change the way everyone does business. So if we become advocates for it, and we support other companies to do it as well, and them to improve, etc., then all of the business infrastructure is going to change, and will be better in terms of delivery to stakeholders of society and the environment. So yeah, again, I think for us it was a very simple thing because of our purpose and what we'd already committed to doing, and that was our main strategic aims for business. And Emily's nodding away furiously. Have I just stolen your thunder, Emily? Sorry.
No, I think you've hit it spot on, really. It was very aligned to what we were already doing. I think that was always our kind of messaging. We're not just doing something because of B Corp, for example. It all aligns to our values, but it does provide that almost, like I was going through, that additional framework which we can really sense check against, and as I said, use to guide us in our kind of aspirations and sustainability strategy going forward. So it's all about complementing one another as opposed to working in isolation and all that.
Yeah, I think one thing just to pick up on that actually, and is as well, one of the reasons for that I advocated for this to the board and such like was there's that external scrutiny as well, and we can talk about how great we think we are all the time. We can all do that. We can be blindsided. We can think we're doing much better than we are, and being a part of a scheme like this is then requiring the transparency for us and is assessing us against recognised criteria. Also, validates what we're doing well, but also challenges us, and I think that's really important as well. It's important to be comfortable and strong with what you're doing, but it's also right to seek external scrutiny.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Iain and Emily, for that presentation. It was really, really useful and interesting for me and for our members as well. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question today. We've run out of time. Thanks to everyone for logging in. I hope you found that as beneficial as I did. And if you are an IES member, don't forget to record your attendance at this webinar on the IES CPD tool, which you can access by logging into the members area of the website. As I mentioned, this webinar has been recorded and will be made available on the YouTube channel. And so if you're watching this on YouTube, please do subscribe to our channel, like the video, and hit the bell to gain notifications of new content. The next IES webinar is next week and it'll be on the 25th of September. And this is part of our Day in the Life series, which will share stories from environmental professionals about how work has evolved and how it may change in the future. This webinar will be presented by Monica Rivas Casado, Reader in Environmental Systems Engineering at Cranfield University. And as usual, you can register for this on our website. Thank you. A massive thank you once again to Iain and Emily. I hope you enjoyed this, and to all of you. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.